Good morning and good afternoon to all of you, and even good evening to some of you in the very east of our world. First of all, I would like to thank CITI for inviting ITMF to become an international partner of the second Global Textile Conclave in 2021. In this session, we are looking at the global fiber situation. Fibers are the basis material for any textile product. The availability and the functional characteristics of fibers are crucial for the performance of the downstream textile industry. Fiber producers must constantly adapt to new demand requirements, while functional criteria and prices of fibers were and are crucial. With sustainability, one additional aspect came to the forefront in the past decade. We are very fortunate today to welcome three eminent experts from the fiber industry who will share with us their expertise and especially their vision for our industry from a fiber perspective. Before I start introducing the first speaker, I would like to let everybody know that the three presentations will be made available after the event, if this is wished so. Having said that, now let me introduce our first speaker. Mr. Uday Gill is Chief Strategy Officer of Indorama Ventures Limited, headquartered in Thailand since 2007. Indorama Venture Limited is an $11 billion global leader in the petrochemical and fiber space, with 104 manufacturing sites in 31 countries around the world. Prior to Indorama Venture Limited, Mr. Gill was business head of Reliance Industries in Mumbai from 1991 to 2007, and chief executive for JCT Limited in New Delhi. And prior to that, he worked for the Cotton Corporation in Mumbai as executive director in the early 90s. Let us now listen to Mr. Gill's presentation.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I thank CITI for inviting me to their platform, and I thank Dr. Christian for hosting this panel. First of all, I must say that our current generation is in a consumption trap, wherein reducing consumption will have serious economic consequences, while not doing so, we'll have to bear huge environmental costs. We have not been accounting for environmental costs in our textile design, textile production and consumption, and that continues to strain on our natural systems and resources. Our preference of stuff and experience has taken precedence over clean water, clean air, lush green forests, and its ecosystems. Someone is paying the price as the species are getting extinct, climate is getting more hostile, and eventually humans will not escape the consequences of our own actions. As we have economically progressed, the planet, which is the major stakeholder, has suffered. So compellingly now, we are bringing sustainability to the forefront as our human existence is coming under threat. 91% of the world's population lives in places where air pollution exceeds WHO safe limits. Air pollution has become one of the leading causes of death. While textiles are helping to solve some of the big problems like air filtration, water filtration, but it still continues to pose challenges for sustainability. Our textile production and consumption has grown by 60% to 56 million tons over the last 15 years. and it's going to more than double by 2050. And we are wasting $500 billion worth value of textiles by not recycling and also underutilizing the availability of our resources. The fundamentals of sustainability have not changed. It continues to be reduce, reuse, recycle. But we have to focus more on durable design, design for recycling, and shared economy like garment rentals, and also focusing on recycling when a garment is recycled back to the garment at the same quality. There are hurdles to bring the textile recycling to the scale where we can say that we are sustainable in terms of our use, production, and our design. Fast fashion and the very design of textiles we use has become difficult to handle as we cannot separate the multiple components, and the footprint of our textile production is forcing the logistics of crisscross movement. Our habits and behaviors need to change and need wider social awareness that fast fashion and human desire to change need to be balanced, keeping in view the environmental costs and the economic output. So far, we have not achieved much success in the textile recycling. The PET bottle to textile recycling into fabrics and garments does not solve the problem of textile waste. So, what we need to do, it cannot be solved by a single agency or a single individual. We need to build a global infrastructure for recycling. The governments will have to participate more in creating policies and incentivize recycling technologies and sustainable technologies. Similarly, we have to develop processes that help design and sustainable manufacture of garments. So, and there is a need for social clusters to participate in our recycling and the sustainable initiatives. Eventually, it's like to like recycling, what we have to address, and it will require active participation of communities, social clusters, comments, and encourage shorter supply chains near the consumption centers. I'm very encouraged to see a collaboration amongst all the stakeholders for sustainable textile solutions, and the momentum for this is building up very rapidly. I can see that United Nations drive to fashion industry to net zero greenhouse gas emission no later than 2050, in line with keeping global warming standards of less than 1.5 degrees under their fashion charter for climate action. ITMF is also involved in this project. And similarly, there are other universities and institutes who are participating. To name one or two: Biotex Future, Sustainable Apparel Coalition, and not only these institutions, but the certain countries like Bangladesh, Finland, who have taken initiatives, like Bangladesh being a large garment producer, is aiming to achieve long-term scalable transition to circular fashion economy. Similarly, Finland has created a eco-community for green field hub on a large scale. So these are really examples which the rest of the world has to embrace. Similarly, to name the industrial brands, H&M is one of the leaders in embracing sustainability solutions for textiles, and they are also able to issue 500 million sustainability linked bonds, which also shows that there is value in following these actions. At Indorama, we have committed to invest $1.5 billion in recycling, and we are actively collaborating with other like-minded stakeholders in the industry. We run all our projects through what we call our sustainability lens, and we'll encourage other industries to follow the same. And we have recently relaunched a brand, Deja, which is our sustainability lead for IVL products. Way forward, we have to maintain and improve the quality of life by protecting diversity and ecosystems of our planet. Sustainability has evolved into a broader term, ESG, environment, social governance, and it has become a source of competitive advantage. To end, we all have to address our past unsustainable behaviors and actions and be answerable to the next generations. This artwork is made by my grandson, Cameron Witt, with the theme Hope for Our Life is in Human Hands. We owe answer to our next generations. This artwork was recognized in UK and it will be printed on the Christmas cards for 2021. And I must say that we have to sensitize everyone in our communities to participate in these initiatives that are meant for all good. Thank you very much for listening to me and for your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gill, for this very comprehensive and inspiring presentation. We will have to come back to some aspects in the Q&A part of the session. Let me now first introduce our next speaker. Mr. Kai Hughes, he is the Executive Director of the International Cotton Advisory Committee, ICAC, based in Washington, D.C., USA. The ICAC is one of only 7 intergovernmental commodity bodies recognized by the United Nations. Prior to the ICAC, he was the Managing Director of the International Cotton Association, ICA, based in Liverpool, and was also instrumental in the formation of the ICA Bremen, a joint venture with the Bremen Cotton Exchange for Cotton Testing, Research and Quality Training Center. Kai, may I please invite you to share your presentation with us? Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Christian, for that introduction and for allowing me the opportunity to say a few words about the cotton outlook. And after that, I just want to touch on a few subjects that I believe will dictate what the future cotton landscape will look like and what we in the cotton and textile sector need to be thinking about. I've only got 8 minutes, so I'll not be able to cover these subjects in depth, but rather I'm hoping to give you some nuggets and some key points to think about. So let me start by setting the scene and looking at the current production and consumption figures and our forecast for the next season. Global production for 2020-21 is currently estimated at 24.2 million tons, which is an 8% decrease from the previous season, with decreases coming from several major producers such as the United States, Brazil, Pakistan, West Africa, Turkey, and Uzbekistan. Consumption for 2020-21 is estimated to be 24.5 million tons. The 7% expected growth in mill use, whilst a recovery, would not be a complete rebound from the losses incurred during the pandemic, but it would certainly exceed production for the current season. With consumption exceeding production, stock levels are expected to decrease to 21.1 million tons by the end of the season. And the stocks to use ratio is expected to fall to 0.86 from the historic high reached last season of 0.94. I think we have some noise in the background.
Can you now lecture? Can you please mute?
Okay, I'll carry on. And the International reference price for cotton, the Cotlook A index, has steadily risen over the course of the season. Increased demand will be linked to economic recovery and also the control of the pandemic. Overall, there will be an expansion in planted area globally, which will result in slightly higher prices and a likely increased supply. Now, I would like to quickly cover some of the main challenges for cotton moving forward. I know that many of you will have seen this graph by me produced by the ICA, which I've shown many times. However, what I want you to note is the huge growth in the consumption of synthetic fibers, especially over the last 20 to 25 years. And that during that time, the consumption of cotton has remained relatively stable at around 20 to 25 million tons. So what this has meant for cotton is that if you look at that grey line, cotton's share of the market has dropped from approximately 68% in 1960 down to just 27% in 2020 and could be around 25% in 2025, even though consumption has risen from just over 10 million tons in 1960 to nearly 25 million tons today. And perhaps most interestingly, whilst the population continues to grow, cotton usage per person has not really changed much since 1960. What has changed is our use of synthetic or chemical fibers. So the big question is, will this still be the case over the next 10 years? Well, over the last couple of years, and particularly over the last year, we have seen some major developments and changes in consumer thinking that I think are important when predicting future cotton demand. Firstly, let's have a look at the effects of COVID on people's purchasing preferences, as this could be a key to the future. First of all, people in developed countries such as the US, the EU and Japan, which are the top 3 importers of textiles and apparel goods, are expected to increase their online shopping post-COVID-19 with an estimated 20% growth in online shopping for apparels and in the US alone. In particular, in athleisure wear, which was already becoming a mega trend before the pandemic started, has seen a huge increase as more and more workers in developed countries are working from home. Sustainability is also a very important topic for consumers, and brands are becoming more engaged in producing more sustainable and circular products. In addition, because of social media, consumers, especially Generation Z consumers, are making more conscious choices about what they wear. And because of the pandemic and accusations of forced labor in areas like Xinjiang, they're becoming more aware of how vulnerable employees in the fashion value chain are. So these consumers are likely to make issues such as ethical sustainability and environmental sustainability a longer-term trend. This generation is also much more aware of issues such as sustainability and the effects of production on climate change, so these need to be major factors in the production of textiles and apparel and their labeling. So let's just take a quick look at climate change. It's fair to say that cotton production contributes very little to climate change. In fact, if you break it down in terms of all the greenhouse gas emissions associated with cotton production is somewhere between 5 and 10%, and even less if organic. And this figure is linked to the use of irrigation, fertilizers, and pesticides. However, the manufacture of cotton accounts for 20 to 30% of greenhouse gas emissions and is associated with the production and processing of cotton, such as spinning and the use of chemicals. But the biggest contributor to greenhouse gases actually comes from us when we wash and iron our clothes and bed sheets. In fact, for all fibers, both natural and synthetic, the greenhouse gas emissions will be the same during the yarn production phase. So what is important is actually what happens before that. Now here is a comparison of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of fiber during production. However, I should note that the graph only considers energy for the production of synthetic fibers, and it doesn't consider the energy costs of mining fossil fuels, petroleum production, and the environmental burden of non-degradability. So the picture would be even worse for synthetics if we did that, especially as cotton is biodegradable. And the figures for cotton reflects conventional cotton. For organic cotton, the greenhouse gas emissions would be even less. So the story here is that synthetic fibers are bad for the environment. Anyway, but they're even worse than this graph shows due to the greenhouse gases emitted during the mining of fossil fuels, etc., used to make them. However, when we look at population growth, world population growth, we can see that over the next 10 to 12 years, the growth is mainly in Asia, especially China and India. And as these countries grow and become more wealthy, there is more money to spend on apparel goods. And thus the big question is that if there is a move away from synthetic fibers, how will cotton be able to fill this gap when it already has competition from food and for land? Can it in fact fill that gap? Or will some of that gap be replaced by recycled clothing and other non-chemical based products? To conclude, I have to admit that there is one major and urgent problem for cotton on the horizon, the elephant in the room, and that is climate change. As temperatures increase, we get more rains and more erratic monsoons and frequent floods as well as droughts. I find this a very sobering picture, especially when I look at those traditional rain-fed cotton areas in Africa, India, and South America. Needless to mention, erratic rainfall can devastate rain-fed agriculture. Temperatures are predicted to go up between 1 and 2 degrees by 2025. And even an average 1 degree temperature rise can cause huge losses for the cotton crop. So you can see this is a very complex story around cotton, and I've only briefly touched on just a few topics. However, the future for cotton, I believe, looks brighter than it has ever has been over the last decade, as it is becoming more and more the sustainable fiber of choice. And now we need to shout about all that is good about cotton and also the value added by its byproducts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kai, for this special look at cotton and its place and perspective in the world's textile industry. I will get back to you and some of your points mentioned in the Q&A part, but let me now go on to our third eminent speaker, and we are really happy also to have today with us Mr. Robert van de Kerkhof. He is the Chief Commercial Officer of Lenzing, headquartered in Austria. Lenzing is one of the world's leading producers of cellulosic fibers. In his role, he is heading the performance of marketing and sales, corporate sustainability, and supply chain. A veteran in the fiber industry with over 25 years of experience, he is also the president of the Austrian Fiber Institute and vice president of CIFS, the European Man-Made Fiber Association. Prior to Lenzing, Mr. van der Kerkhof began his career as an aeronautical engineer at Fokker Aircraft. Since then, he has taken up roles in Tenkate, DuPont, and Invista. Mr. van der Kerkhof, the floor is yours. Thank you for your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction. Voila. Thank you very much for the introduction. And I would like to start already immediately off with this slide. And I would like to first of all give a compliment to the organization for an excellent program, and also to my two predecessors, because I think it's very complimentary of what I'm going to say, because I would like to focus a little bit on the whole future of sustainable sourcing. We talk now since many years that fashion is a major contributor to the sustainability issues our planet is facing since many years. And every time we hear, oh, we need to start now, it is 5 to 12, we need to start now. And I'm getting a little bit worried because as long as we think we still have 5 minutes left, we are not really starting. I think it is 5 past 12, and I really would like to then also build on the comment that Kai just made. If you look at the impact of, for instance, now the climate change has on floodings, on droughts, those are effects we are confronted with today. And I'm not even talking about the future of our employee workforce that need to work in the fields, etc., under extremely hot temperature conditions. So this is really an issue that we need to work on today. Now, if I look at where are we see 2 battles being fought. I'm a little bit provocative here. 2 battles being fought. The other one is fighting for the planet. We have leaders, like we just heard, Indorama, definitely a leader. 1.5 billion commitment in circularity. 1.5 billion, that is a huge commitment because it's not only the money, but it's also all the people, the management attention it gets, significant commitment. Then we heard also about the impact on the cotton side and also what they're trying to do to improve the overall impact on reducing pesticides, etc. A huge effort is taking place right now to recycle garments, to reduce the amount of CO2 emissions, to be much more aware of what creates microplastics and what we can do to stop it. We also talked a little bit already about the forced labor issues that are coming up because labor is a huge issue. We all remember the Rana Plaza event in Bangladesh, but also of course, the more recent forced labor issues that we hear from cotton in China. So we really see the industry realizing the problems and really fighting for the planet. But if we then look at the fast fashion, if we then look at some of the retailers that are really growing quite rapidly, that are actually also responsible for setting the product specifications that in the end get sold to the consumers, these guys are fighting for the penny. So we have an imbalanced world, discount battles, every day, low prices, every day, new collections. So please buy it, wear 2 weeks, and then throw it away. So this mindless consumption is really driven by the marketing strategy. And then you have the people that really also, this bullwhip effect in the value chain. And what I mean with that is the people that are trying to take advantage of the innovations that some people early in the value chain are bringing. So for instance, if we bring an innovation that costs a lot of money in R&D and also has a higher production price and therefore might be sold maybe at a 10-20% price premium. If we then look at the beginning of the value chain, that innovation, our direct customers, the spinners or the fabric producers, they all say, wow, this is a unique product. Let me add a little bit of a premium for myself as well. And that means that a 10-20% premium might end up with 100% premium at fabric level. So it makes these kind of innovations almost not competitive or way too expensive for the brands and retailers to introduce those. And we've personally seen that with the innovations like a Refibra fiber, where the commercial effect, although it is a really circular concept already since a few years on a commercial scale, hardly gets bought by the brands and retailers. So that is really a big issue. So we need to be aware of these major difference in battle, and we need to change that attitude. We need to work with the leaders on both sides to make sure that we can change the industry, because we can do it. The future is now. We need to join forces. We have solutions. And Uday, I mean, I found this on the Ikorama chips. I mean, I really like the name that you launched now, Déjà. You know, as a francophone, I think it's great. It's simple. It's to the point. Very, very good. So great innovation from your side. We see innovations like Sequel, we see innovation like Reprieve. We as Lenzing have then the Refibra technology that I mentioned, but also new innovations are coming. We have launched our first fiber end of 2020, which we claim is true carbon zero. So we have reduced the amount of carbon consumed in the production process. We have then really worked with all the suppliers so they can reduce the amount of carbon that we need to use in the chemicals, etc., that we purchase. And then there's still definitely some remaining CO2, and that's where offsetting. So it is really still for us necessary to offset it, but we've done that also with NGOs that actually audit the offsetting, but we can really offer right now a true carbon zero lyocell fiber. These are just a handful of examples. There are many, many more examples that we really as an industry are bringing to the market. So it's really important that we then have those coming also to the consumers. And there, the really critical step is actually the brands and retailers that need to specify those. Plus, it needs to be then the cooperation of the value chain partners to avoid that bullwhip effect that I mentioned. Now, one of the key things that is always an issue with sustainability, and that is the lack of transparency. And there is no such thing like sustainability without transparency. And there we see a lot of new tools coming. So, for instance, there are different fiber producers that can distinguish their good fibers from bad fibers by having some kind of a tracer technology integrated in fiber. We see the HIC index that is really also trying to come up with a standardization of how the environmental impact of the various raw materials for the textile industry is being ranked and rated, and that is still under development for further optimization, but it's a great starting point at this moment. We have technologies like Circular ID, which are now being developed by a little startup in New York that will also facilitate for instance, the sorting and the selection of which garments can be used for post-consumer recycling. Small little startup, but great technology. It exists today, it just needs to be adapted. All the way from tree down to consumers with blockchain technology like the startup Textile Genesis is a great technology to really make sure also that the innovations I mentioned on the left can, without any greenwashing, be really transported to the brands and retailers and ultimately to the consumer. And then we have, of course, also more and more support, and here I just put now the EU in there, but we have more and more support from the government, from the policymakers, to make sure that these kind of technologies get preferred, that there are going to be also subsidies, regulation that is really necessary. So just as an example, I put the EU there, but I know many countries are working on providing tools to facilitate the introduction of these sustainable products. So tools are there, solutions are there. We only can do it together as leaders in the industry to bring together the future of sustainable sourcing with the brands and retailers. So there's a little bit of background noise right now, but anyway, I think my message is very clear. Solutions are there, technologies are there, so it's really up to us as leaders to make the impact, to make sure that the consumers get it, to make sure the consumer is educated. In the end, yes, there will very likely be a price increase for the consumers, but I think it's worse for the planet to make sure that the higher price is passed on. So with that, I would like to thank you all for your time. So tools are there, solutions are there. We only can do it together as leaders in the industry to bring together the future of sustainable sourcing with the brands and retailers. So
that we now start very quickly with the Q&A part of our session. And my first question goes to Mr. Kai Hughes. Kai, you talked about how population is increasing and how you believe synthetic textiles will become less popular, therefore creating a demand gap. But you also said that cotton consumption has remained pretty steady over the last 10 years. So how will cotton fill this gap in demand? Can it really?
Thanks, Christian. Really interesting question. I hope I'm not going to get interrupted by, maybe we can put that person on mute. Cotton will not be able to fill completely that gap. However, what cotton can do, cotton has two big advantages. First of all, and this may sound really strange, it has low yields in Africa and India. Now, why is that an advantage? Let me explain. So if you look at other rain-fed countries like Turkey and Brazil, their yields are between 1,600 and 1,800 kilograms per hectare of cotton lint. Average yields in India are around 480 kilograms per hectare. So some of the lowest yields in the world are in India. Africa, looking at Southeast Africa, 300, 350 kilograms per hectare. In West Africa, 450 kilograms per hectare. So these two areas, Africa and India, have huge potential. One, because places like Africa have land and low yields, and India has low yields. So if we can bring those yields up, and let me just give you an example, if we just brought the yields up in India to global average, that would mean an extra 3.6 million tons of cotton produced in India each year. Just to get it to world average, which is 780 kilograms per hectare. So imagine if you can get beyond that. And that technology so that technology is available, and we can do that. I don't know if you can hear me, but anyway. And the other big advantage for cotton is that cotton, when we talk about cotton fiber, that is only half the story, because the other half is the byproducts of cotton. So that's what makes cotton such an attractive crop. Not only can you make clothes, you can also make food for your cattle, you can make cottonseed oil, and you can make 101 different byproducts out of cotton.
Thank you very much, Kai, for this explanation. Can I please ask everybody who is not on the panel to mute themselves, please? That brings me to our second question, which goes to both Mr. Gill and Mr. van der Kerkhof. International brands have made commitments to promote circularity. What impact is foreseen in the demand and supply of recycled fibers, especially pre- and post-consumer waste? How are you gearing up for that? Maybe Mr. Gill and then Mr. Robert van der Kerkhof.
Thank you, Christian. I must say that we are hearing by the day, a lot of brands are making commitments for circularity of textiles, which is a very, very encouraging element. But I would say that brands alone cannot do or fulfill their commitments unless the whole supply chain and the value chain responds to it. To some extent, I would say on the supply side, so far we have been able to move the bottle to fabrics into the recycling, which most of the brands have embraced, certainly. But that doesn't solve, as I said in my presentation, that doesn't solve the textile waste problem, the garments. So eventually the other brands, I'm sorry. So PepsiCo, I look forward to more collaboration at levels, at community levels, more bottles, so that we can support the brands to fulfill the overall industry. Because that is the engine. I would say there are challenges. That is where it starts, and that is where it has to end. Supply chain, all part of the supply chain. So I believe in terms of technology, Robert is also there. The garments, because the way we design them, the way he can add to me, produce them, and where we produce them.
Thank you very much.
I can see that there has
indeed. I think
a lot of
building on Uday, the challenges really are initially on the supply. I think there's a three-step approach. Number one, we need to secure the supply. We need to secure the supply due to a lot of old textiles that we don't know really what is in it. So that is going to be an issue when this is going to be recycled. So how can we do the sorting? We also then need to work with designers on really designing for circularity. I think this is slowly coming. You see some brands like Adidas that are specific in the sporting goods industry. This is what is happening. And I think that is a really important move, and that needs to be adapted specifically also by the fast fashion retailers, where circularity will become really critical for the success of that business model. We also need to work with the various organizations like the recycling companies. So how do you collect the waste? How do you separate the waste? And then we need to work with the politicians to say what kind of legislation is needed. So for instance, in Europe, where I'm confronted at this moment, if I collect garments, it's considered as waste. I need a special permit if I want to transport and reprocess waste. So these are small things, but they are entry barriers. So I think those are the kind of things that we need to work on, and the EU is really committed to drive changes there at European level, and that needs to be introduced individual country legislation. Now, as a company, we need to then make sure that we are ready. So we need to prepare our assets, that we can blend in our waste at a regular level, that we also have the quality standards and the whole quality process that can do it, plus then a certification that you really make sure that it's not greenwashing. My biggest concern is that in the beginning, there will be a lot of greenwashing around circularity. And I believe that with, again, the tools I mentioned also in my presentation, this can be avoided. but we need that to gain the trust of the consumer to make sure that recycle is actually a high quality garment. I think that is really, for me, very important. So working on a raw material supply, working on the legislation, and working our own assets is what we are doing to prepare for this mega trend where the train has left the station. So now it's just how fast can we actually implement it and how fast can we get the confidence of the consumer to commercialize it.
Thank you very much, both Uday and Robert, for these really in-depth answers to this very complex question of how to really go about recycling. Let me follow up with Kai on the next question. And Mr. Kotak, you will be asked a little later, so give me a few minutes and then I will take your question. You showed a lot of positives for cotton moving forward, but you ended up with a sobering negative wake-up call about climate change and the rising temperatures and the problem for cotton growing. How can we mitigate the effects of climate change on cotton?
Yes, thank you, Christian, for that question. And let me just make the picture worse, and so people really understand how bad climate change can be for cotton. So even if you have an average mean temperature of just over 26 degrees Celsius, for example, you're going to see decreases in length, you're going to see decreases in micronair, you're going to see decreases in uniformity. And when we look at temperatures over mean temperatures over 27 degrees Celsius, we see a reduction in boll weight. But more frightening is if we see mean temperatures over 32 degrees Celsius, because that's when we lose boll retention, and that is a disaster for cotton. So the potential for a disaster is there. What can we do about it? The answer is really quite simple. We have to develop temperature resilient cultivars, and we have to improve soil health. Another, I mentioned at the end that we have to shout about what is good about cotton, but actually cotton is also a great mitigator of climate change, and a lot of people don't know that. So, for example, cotton will actually sequester carbon emissions, and will actually sequester 0.5 kilogram of CO2 equivalent carbon emissions than it actually produces. So it's a great sequester of carbon, and then you add that to improving soil health, and you've really got these fantastic carbon sinks. So climate change, the outlook is bad, but we can do something about it if we develop temperature resilient cultivars and we improve soil health.
Thank you, Kai. This brings me to the fourth question, and then we open the floor for the audience. And that goes to, again, Robert and Uday. India has identified man-made fibers as a priority to rebalance the value chain. What are the opportunities and constraints for the man-made fiber value chain in India? Anyone who would like to start? Uday or Robert?
I can start. Just also building a little bit on Kai's comments earlier, because his chart was quite interesting, where you see that roughly 65% of the worldwide fiber production actually are the man-made fibers or the synthetic fibers. For India, it's the opposite way, right? I mean, it's 65% is cotton or natural fibers, and then only about 35% are the man-made fibers. So that shows you already a tremendous potential that it has to grow. But what I like to also state is, just when I look at India itself as a country, the experience I have with India and our partners in India, they really have world-class technology, world-class workforce. And I think that is a tremendous potential for growth. India has a strong domestic market, which I think for every industry to grow is something that is an opportunity to grow initially domestic and then afterwards look for the export opportunities. But also in the many years I've been doing business initially with Lycra and then now, of course, with Lenzing in India, it's also about the Indian government. And I've really seen a progress there when it comes to reducing bureaucracy, or also improving the overall compliance mentality of the government and others. So I think that is a great potential. What is a barrier are still the tariffs that India applies to several of the products. I think that is a major disadvantage for the domestic industry players. They are not competitive as a consequence on the international platform of textiles. So it's hampering growth. It's also reducing, as a consequence, investments in foreign investments, because I think at this moment, why produce only for a domestic market if you have a disadvantaged position if you want to export or import. And I think specifically on the export side, I see another opportunity, because also due to COVID, we just see that brands and retailers are much more sensitive to a dominant country as a supplier. They are looking at spreading the country risk when they source fabrics or garments. And I think India has tremendous opportunity there to become really a world-class exporter of goods. So I think that is the balance between more opportunities, a few barriers, which hopefully can be addressed in the next few years.
Let me add to Robert. I think Robert made a very pertinent remark to balance regulation and also improve.
Please, Uday. You have to unmute yourself, Uday.
So in order to follow on Robert's remarks, he's already covered, but I must say that man-made fibers, Government of India in the current textile policy recently announced has come out with major initiatives. So we will see some progress in that direction. And the second point is that I wanted to just address one thing, which certainly Mishkai has raised, that cotton is the super fiber. I totally agree with him, but no single fiber can deliver all the functionalities. And I must say that the real home of man-made fibers is industrial applications. That is where the man-made fibers will continue to progress, because that's where the performance comes in. So in terms of performance, man-made fibers has been very aggressively moving into nonwovens, into industrial applications. So that goes without saying. That's the real home. But on the apparel side and on the textile side, I would say cotton and viscose continue to be the fibers of choice, but the blends, I think we can move towards cotton-rich brands, and also wherever we need the functionalities to improve, the MMF comes in. What's happening is that the fashion brands are becoming more performance-driven. The fashion is looking for performance, and whereas the performance products are getting fashionable. So that's the reason man-made fibers will continue to play its role in providing the performance and also some element of fashion. So I'm a very strong believer of multiple fibers giving the functionalities, but at the same time, we have to develop. Today we are discussing the circularity and the recycling. We have to design, as Robert also said, we have to design our garments for circularity, for recycling. And also we have to have a balance between the economic costs, the economic output and the sustainability costs or environmental costs going forward. A lot to be done. I think we are at the moment talking to ourselves as an industry. We have to activate the communities. we have to activate the rest of the stakeholders more. And I think we are still not there. If I have to say government to government, like circularity or recycling. But for India, I think the future is in industrial application.
Thank you very much, Uday. This gives now the opportunity to take some questions from the floor. Mr. Kotak, you were waving your hand. Please, a short question for any of the panelists. Please unmute yourself. Mr. Kotak, can you hear me? You have to unmute yourself if you have a question. No? Yes, now. Quick.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please, sir.
See, I'm very happy to hear a remarkable presentations of all three friends. All have given certain common ideas. The common idea where the centrality is drawn is that resources are scarce and the resources have to be circularly used in a new circular economy. So given this fact and one of the most important point that has been brought about is the multi-use of fiber, the community of fibers to be used for multiple different uses has been very well brought out by Mr. Gill and others also. The circularity and multiple applications of the fiber is a very important thing. To the cotton's advantage, I am glad that Hughes has definitely given an idea that it is not the cotton growing which creates gas emissions, but it is only the manufacturing which is a common factor which creates gas emission. That was a very well done thing. Now I have two things with this background, that utilizing the regenerative capacity of cotton and genomics, because the cotton has yet not found all the applications. Say, for example, recently we have found from cotton linkers that we are able to have cellulosic nanocellulosic products which can even substitute cement. So such kind of innovations are possible. Mr. Hughes, in Sarkot, we have done this kind of job, that by genomics and by multiple uses of cotton, we can create a great cotton economics, and ultimately all the fibers have to function together in the most judicious way. So this is my question: how best to take cotton further way so that we answer this question of the scarcity of resources and circularity of economy? Kindly enlighten more. Thank you.
Thank you. Kai, you want to quickly answer this question?
And scarcity of resources, Mr. Kotak. Well, of course, one of the big advantages of cotton is it's biodegradable, and you can actually put it back into the soil. So it's regenerative. So in that sense, we're not losing out on growing cotton. And as you quite rightly mentioned, there are all these different byproducts that you can get from cotton as well. But the big thing is it's biodegradable. You can put it back into the soil.
Thank you, Kai. We have two more questions, Mr. Kotak. Please give other people also the chance to answer the questions. We are limited on time. So the next question therefore goes to Mr. Robert. How is the future of supply, of lyocell and tensor to keep pace with the demand?
Thank you very much for the question. What we are currently doing is we are investing a state-of-the-art plant in Thailand, which is for us a bit of the footprint for future growth. It's a 100 kiloton lyocell plant. So we really believe that we are positioning ourselves that we can accelerate the expansion of lyocell by using this new technology. At the same time, what is very critical for us is this raw material supply. So we need to get completely certified wood. It needs to be hardwood. So we are expanding our pulp facilities with a plantation plus a wood producing pulp facility in Brazil. The Thai plant will start up end of this year, and hopefully, everything will work well, because then we can further expand. And the Thai facility will already have a pulp capacity for at least 4 additional lyocell plants. So the growth is secured with internal raw material supply and technology development.
Thank you very much. I have one more question for Mr. Gill. Is recycling another argument to reshore parts of the global textile industry to industrialized countries?
Oh, thank you, Christian. I have expressed this earlier on also. So, as we all know, that the consumption of garments, textile is happening in the Western world intensively, in the United States, North America, Europe. That's where the garments sell. That's the end consumption area. If we want to recycle those garments, you cannot think of sending them back to China or India and get them done there and brought it back. That'll be a lot of crisscross movement, and those countries are not sitting there to wash your linen, and they have already, we have seen it in plastics, they banned. So what if the garment is discarded in Europe or in US? There has to be a supply chain and a manufacturing process, which at the moment it exists in very, very small spots, still not fully complete. You cannot just say that I will collect it there and then I will chemically process into some polymer or whatever usable resource, make it a yarn, and then send it for dyeing to some dye house somewhere in China and bring it back and then sew it in Bangladesh. That'll be like, wasting. I would say that'll be unsustainable in terms of if we calculate the green maths of this kind of circularity will not fly. So I would say that eventually I see a parallel circular industry developing globally, which will be of a bigger size than the current industry or the supply chain it is. So that is a huge thing. It's recycling will become a new industry. The second thing, which I think to some extent one of the Indian scale development paper, which I was hearing before, in West, there are 2 things that are going to happen, and which is happening. I can see that. I'm not saying it's happening tomorrow morning. It will take 5 to 10 years. The skill gap is getting resolved by automation and by artificial intelligence, and same way, the automation is also bringing down the wage gap in the West. So as the automation improves and the artificial intelligence, all these algorithms start controlling the quality, so the skill gap will also improve. So I'm seeing a new age industry is needed, which will be highly driven by technology to reprocess our textile waste back to like textiles. This is a big gap, and it's a big opportunity as per me.
Thank you very much, Uday.
Christian, can I just add to that? From
yes,
Uday,
very shortly, because we're running out of time. Very shortly.
Okay. Very shortly, but I completely agree with Uday. We've got to start thinking about circularity, recycling, and the simple reason is that currently, if you look at synthetic fibers, for example, chemical fibers, they're non-biodegradable, and it's estimated that 70% of landfill is filled with non-biodegradable synthetic fibers. We've got to do something about that.
Thank you, Kai, and I thank you, Robert. Thank you, Uday, very much for this very informative and really almost educational session. And with that, I would like to hand back to the organizers, to Mr. Sodi, and I would like to thank everybody for your attention and wishing everybody the best, especially stay healthy and safe. Thank you.